Hello everyone, Escoffier, Fontaine's renowned chef and culinary expert, will be the one new 5-star Cryo character releasing in Genshin Patch 5.6. After so many patches of the Cryo element struggling in terms of meta viability due to its overall weaker character roster and the falloff of freeze teams, Escoffier is looking to be Cryo's much needed buff to bring the element back into more meta relevance again through her strong team buffs, utility, and personal damage. And even though there is some misinformation out there about how well Escoffier synergizes with some characters, especially Neuvillette, which I will address, Escoffier is looking like a very meta-defining Cryo support who may serve as a team-building centerpiece for future Cryo characters as we head towards Nod Cry and Snezhnaya. To understand just how strong Escoffier can be, in this comprehensive guide, I will be explaining how Escoffier works, the best ways to build her, her potential best teams, and analyzing her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Pretty much everything you need to know with simple and practical explanations, while also giving more detailed analysis that is backed by TC, including plenty of pre-release calcs on Escoffier. Escoffier is a 5-star Cryo polearm user who is Uxia aligned in a sense with crit rate. She is Genshin's first proper off-field Cryo sub DPS with a kit resembling other off-field sub DPSes like Fischl, Chiori, and Emily. However, while Fischl, Chiori, and Emily just deal damage, Escoffier not only does damage as well, but also provides healing in Hydro and Cryo Red Shred for the team, with her Red Shred increasing significantly if the team consists of only Hydro and Cryo characters. Escoffier's skill works the same way as other characters with off-field turret-based abilities. Pressing her skill deals one instance of AoE damage, generates 4 particles, and spawns a cooking mech that follows the active character for 20 seconds. During this time, the mech will fire a single target-oriented Cryo attack toward a nearby enemy every second. These attacks will apply Cryo every other hit or once every 2 seconds, which means that Escoffier's skill will have the same amount of Cryo application as Citlali's Frostfall Storm and Rosaria's Burst Ticks. This skill also has a 15-second cooldown, so with a 20-second duration, you can easily maintain full uptime on Escoffier's off-field damage. You can also hold the skill, which allows you to place the mech down to feed it ingredients and elemental energy to gain a random assortment of dishes with a 7-day timer similar to the parametric transformer. Next, Escoffier's elemental burst is very simple. It just does AoE cryo damage and heals the entire party, scaling off of Escoffier's attack. At burst talent level 9, a 2500 attack Escoffier will heal the entire team for about 9500 HP, which is a pretty strong single instance of healing. But on top of that, Escoffier's A1 passive gives even more healing. After using her burst, Escoffier also heals the active character every second for a total of 9 seconds, scaling off of her attack. With the same attack assumption, each healing tick will heal the active character for about 3400 HP. With a total of 9 healing ticks, Escoffier can heal a total of about 31,000 HP for the active character. For reference, Shilonin's single target healing from her burst, assuming talent level 9 and 2500 defense, heals for about 5500 HP per tick, and with a total of 8 healing ticks from her burst, Shilonin heals a total of about 43,000 HP for the active character. Thus, Escoffier's single target healing from her A1 is comparable while also having good team healing from her burst. So not only does Escoffier deal good off-field damage and apply cryo over her skill, she's also a strong healer. But on top of that, Escoffier also provides a huge team buff in the form of Red Shred with her A4 passive. Escoffier's attack from both her elemental skill and burst will reduce both the Hydro and Cryo resistances of any enemy's hit for 12 seconds. This Hydro and Cryo Red Shred increases based on the number of Hydro and Cryo characters on the team. This increase is not linear, however. Having just 1, 2, or 3 Hydro and Cryo characters on the team will give 5, 10, and 15% red shred for Hydro and Cryo respectively, but having a full party of just Hydro and Cryo characters will give 55% red shred to Hydro and Cryo, which is a lot. In comparison, Shilonin with talent level 10 skill gives 36% red shred, and 4-piece Viridescent Venerer gives 40% red shred. So while Escoffier can be played in any team for her off-field damage, cryo application, and healing, you are heavily incentivized to play her in teams with only Hydro and Cryo characters for the max amount of red shred. And that's everything on Escoffier's base kit. In practice, she plays as your typical off-field character that uses their skill and burst before swapping out. In terms of her talent leveling priority, her skill is the main source of her damage, so prioritize leveling that first. Then level her burst for the AoE damage and healing. With her base kit explained, let's talk about Escoffier's Constellations and whether they're worth pulling for. C1 allows Escoffier to give the team 60% cryo crit damage for 15 seconds after using her skill or burst, but only when the party has only Hydro and Cryo characters. With C2, after Escoffier uses her skill, she can increase the damage of the party's next 5 cryo attacks, buffing in the exact same way as Chen has quills. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3, C4 gives her A1 passive 6 additional healing ticks, and also while the A1 healing is active, there is a chance that the healing gets doubled and will restore 2 energy for Escoffier. The chance of this happening scales off of Escoffier's crit rate, and it can trigger up to 7 times every A1 healing duration. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, and lastly C6 allows Escoffier's skill to fire 6 additional AoE cryo attacks when the active character hits enemies with normal normal, charged, or plunging attacks. Overall, her early Constellations are relatively weaker compared to other early Constellations of more recently released DPSs and supports. While Escoffier C1 only buffs Cryo characters, for Cryo DPSs it can be a 15% team damage increase over C0R0, which is good. However, C2 is underwhelming, since it pretty much only gives 5 quills that are shared by the party, meaning that another Cryo support like Chen can steal the damage buff from your carry. You don't get that much damage from it. From some calcs I've seen, it can be as low as a 4% damage increase over C1, which is pretty bad for a C2. Compare that with Silali C2, which can increase a melt carry's damage by 20 to 25%. So if you do want to vertically invest into Escoffier, do keep in mind that some of her early constellations aren't insanely powerful. Now let's go over Escoffier's best build options, starting with weapon choices. Her signature weapon will be her best in slot for her personal damage. Along with a crit damage substat, the special passive gives Escoffier 24% attack when she's off field, and when Escoffier heals, she gives an additional 32% attack buff for 3 seconds to herself and the character she healed. Overall, Escoffier's signature can be about a 10% damage increase over C0R0, which is slightly lower than the 15% damage increase that C1 can give to a Cryo main DPS team, but the weapon can be used effectively by other characters such as Eon-Sun and Chevreuse. Escoffier does have several other weapon options that are also very good. For 5-star weapons, any damage stat stick can be fine, but the 2 best looking damage options are Calamity Queller and Staff of Homa. If Escoffier needs energy recharge, Engulfing Lightning is also a good 5-star option. For 4-star weapon options, the best damage oriented choice will be Deathmatch, the battle pass weapon. But in teams where Escoffier needs a lot of ER, such as in single cryo or even double cryo teams, Favonius Lance will be her best 4-star option, even better than a lot of the other 5-star choices, just to help her meet her energy requirements. Here is the complete weapon comparison made by theory crafter Harumi. Big thanks to her for allowing me to showcase her calcs. The left table assumes Escoffier having a lower ER requirement of 140%, while the right table assumes Escoffier having a higher ER requirement of 180%. Feel free to pause to look for specific weapons. Do keep in mind, however, that although there may seem to be a large damage difference between 2 weapons, the actual damage you gain or lose isn't that significant. For instance, although Favonius Lance is about 13% worse than Deathmatch at 140 ER, the actual damage difference is 50k damage, which isn't too significant when you consider the damage of an entire team rotation. For artifacts, because Escoffier's main source of off-field damage comes from her elemental skill, 4-piece Golden Troop is her overall best set. For a more supportive set, you can also use 4-piece Tenacity of the Millilith to give extra attack for your primary carry. However, in many scenarios, Escoffier will be paired with Farina, and whether Farina is solo or double Hydro, if you want the attack buff from 4-piece Tenacity on your main carry, it is more optimal to have Farina use 4-piece Tenacity and keep Escoffier on 4-piece Golden Troop to buff her damage. Lastly, I have seen some discussion about 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. However, the crit rate from the 4-piece requires both frozen enemies and them being affected by cryo. A lot of enemies such as bosses can't be frozen, and the more Hydro characters there are on the team, the enemy will not have a cryo aura for a given time. So TLDR, don't use 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. In terms of artifact stats, Hourglass will be attack or ER. Attack Hourglass is generally better than energy recharge, as if you need the energy, it's generally better to use an ER weapon like Favonius and build more ER substats. Goblet will be attack or cryo damage. Both choices are quite close in damage, as Escoffier's Hydro cryo teams don't have many attack buffs, but have a lot of sources of damage percent, such as from 4-piece Golden Troop and Farina. On top of attack increasing Escoffier's healing, attack is generally preferred. However, if Escoffier is in a team with Shenhe, Cryo Damage Goblet will be a better choice, so Escoffier can get more damage out of Shenhe's quills. Lastly, Circlet will be crit rate or crit damage, depending on your build stats. For substats, prioritize energy recharge until you have enough, then crit, then attack percent. For how much energy recharge Escoffier needs to build, it heavily depends on the specific teams, such as how many cryo characters there are and how many Favonius users are present, and even whether or not the team actually wants to use Escoffier's burst every rotation. I have some general ranges listed here that you can aim for. Finally, let's go over Escoffier's best team comps. Even though Escoffier's A4 passive heavily incentivizes full Hydro and Cryo teams for the maxed res shred, Escoffier's abilities are strong enough on their own to the point where she's still an effective off-field Cryo support even in non-full Hydro and Cryo teams. In these non-freeze teams, you can treat Escoffier as a better version of Rosaria in terms of damage. However, one thing to keep in mind is that even though Escoffier's skill technically has the same amount of Cryo app as Rosaria's Burst Ticks and Sitlali's Frostfall Storm, which can enable melt teams, her kit doesn't have an additional cryo application that can help easily and consistently wipe a strong pyro aura on her own. In contrast, Rosaria's skill applies cryo twice in quick succession, and Sitlali's burst spawns a skull that applies another source of cryo. Consequently, solo cryo Escoffier in melt teams will necessitate proper rotation setup if you want to properly enable buffs and melts for your pyro carry. For example, Escoffier will be a fine melt support for pyro carries like Arlecchino and Mawika, either as a solo cryo or paired with Sitlali. Escoffier can also be played in the Huta double Hydro team with Farina and Yelan, providing some Hydro Res Shred for the double Hydro core. In these non-freeze teams without a full party of Hydro and Cryo units, Escoffier is a decent usable alternative, but most of the time other supports will generally be better. One exception is potentially HOYOMiX with Escoffier, where it may be her new best team on paper. But where Escoffier really shines is in teams where there are only Hydro and Cryo characters, so that Escoffier can apply her 55% Hydro and Cryo Res Shred onto enemies. The best version of these teams for a Cryo or Hydro main DPS can be boiled down to a core of 3 units. Farina is an amazing partner for Escoffier, as her strong healing will allow for high fanfare generation for a larger team damage buff. For the third support slot, Yelan is a great general option for another damage buff for the on-fielder, as well as more off-field damage. This trio all enables each other to deal good damage from off-field for a solid team core, so you can kind of put any Hydro or Cryo unit as the last party member and the team will function. You can also choose to replace Yelan with a more buffing oriented support such as Shenhe and Sitlali. Shenhe buffs Cryo since she gives her icy quills to each party member, so both Escoffier and a Cryo main DPS will have their damage buffed, and Sitlali buffs Hydra as she gives Hydro Res Shred when Frozen is triggered, as well as being able to hold TTDS. While the Escoffier team core will be good for both Hydra and Cryo main DPSs, Cryo carries are looking to benefit a bit more from Escoffier. For instance, both Ganyu and Rise the Freeze teams are getting a significant damage improvement with Escoffier's addition. Both Ganyu and Rise Mel are still looking to be overall the better team comp in terms of damage, but Escoffier makes their Freeze teams much more comparable to their Melt teams damage wise. But the one Cryo carry that is looking to get the biggest buff from Escoffier is Ayaka. While the calcs do show that Shenhe results in a much higher team DPS, I have also seen calcs where this is mainly due to the Yelan team having a longer rotation, so both Yelan or Shenhe will be a solid final support choice. Ayaka will still run into the issue of her burst potentially not hitting against non-freezable enemies that move around a lot, but despite this, the off-field damage and res shred from Escoffier is looking to make Ayaka a 2.0 carry pretty strong on paper in the modern era of Genshin. Lastly, while her kit isn't 100% confirmed, with the current information we have, it is likely that Skirk's best team will be an Escoffier team. This may change when their actual beta begins and her kit gets changes, but I still want to point out this likelihood. For Hydro main DPSs with Escoffier, pretty much any on-fielder can work, such as Ayato, Nilou, and even Yelan. However, the Hydro main DPS that is on a lot of people's radar is Neuvillette. Instead of his current best team with Farina, Kazuha, and Shilonen, Escoffier can replace either Kazuha or Shilonen for a worse but still decent version of the team. But you can also replace both Kazuha and Shilonen for Escoffier and Sitlali to have a full team of Hydra and Cryo units. Now, there is a popular widespread narrative that I've seen going around saying that Escoffier is a strict buff to Neuvillette and that the Escoffier team with Farina and Sitlali will be Neuvillette's new best team, even better than the current Kazuha and Shilonen team. For example, even Zajeff, who is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, TC-oriented Genshin creators in the community, believes that this is the case, as he states it in his own Escoffier video.
Anyways, all in all, this is going to be Neuvillette's best team once Escoffier comes out. And basically, because of those things, Escoffier will be an upgrade to Neuvillette.
And it is likely that other creators such as Xiox will have similar takes once they release their own guys propagating the narrative. Now, just to preface this, I have a lot of respect for Zajeff as a TC and Genshin creator. He puts in a lot of work in both his streams and YouTube videos, whether it's through calcs, abyss testing, or answering questions. And his content has really helped expand my knowledge of the game when I watched it regularly before, so definitely no ill will to him. I'm just using his video as an example of the narrative going around stating that Escoffier is looking to create Neuvillette's new best team, because from the calcs and TC that I followed, the idea that Escoffier creates the new best Neuvillette team is not so clear cut, as there are a lot of nuances and misconceptions that need to be addressed. And the overall conclusion from many TCers is that Escoffier does not make Neuvillette's overall new best team, and I'll show you some team DPS calcs and explain why this is the case. There are a few key reasons given to support the idea that the Escoffier Neuvillette team is his new best team, which Zajeff does explain in his video. To summarize the main points, even though the Escoffier team makes Neuvillette lose an A1 stack, since the only reaction that the team can trigger against a neutral enemy is freeze, the team damage makes up for this loss in Neuvillette's personal damage through Escoffier's own personal damage and the fact that she can shorten the overall rotation time of the team. This is because Escoffier just needs her skill to be active in attacking an enemy for the res shred to be continually refreshed for 12 seconds. In contrast, buffs like Shilonen and Kazuha's need to be refreshed to maintain their uptime, which requires you to swap back into them and use their skills again, lengthening the rotation. And shorter rotations means a higher damage per second, second. Now based on team DPS calcs comparing the Escoffier team with the Kazuha Shilonen team done by Prastal, big thanks to him for allowing me to showcase his calcs, DPS wise the Escoffier Neuvillette team being better is true. Instead of the normal 28 second rotation, Escoffier can allow a 24.5 second rotation, which on paper makes it a slight DPS increase over the Kazuha Shilonen team. However, there are some major caveats with this result. First, as with all calcs, DPS isn't the only story being told. Sure, a shorter rotation results in a higher DPS, but that doesn't make the team necessarily better. Longer rotations can actually be more effective in combat situations like Spiral Abyss. If there are multiple waves of enemies, longer rotations gives you a more practical benefit of being able to spend that longer time defeating 2 waves of enemies within a single longer rotation. While if you had a shorter rotation, you may not be able to defeat both waves of enemies within the single shorter time frame, and would thus have to rely on a second rotation to defeat the second wave. This is supported by the fact that even though the Escoffier team is calcing with a slightly higher damage per second, the Kazuha Shilonen team has a larger damage per rotation, which can be better in practice. Second, while the Escoffier team does sheet higher, it trades Neuvillette's AoE damage for Escoffier's single target damage. Neuvillette with Escoffier will be doing less of a percentage of the team's damage compared to the Kazuha Shilonen team, and in many scenarios this is actually not preferable. While the single target damage can be fine against bosses, once you get into AoE scenarios where there's more than one enemy, which is one of Neuvillette's biggest strengths, it is much better to deal more damage on Neuvillette's attacks, as Escoffier's damage will only target one enemy. Third, the Escoffier Neuvillette team has a larger energy requirement. In order to have enough energy for the team to function well, you'll likely need an ER weapon on Farina and Favonius Lance on Escoffier, or funnel particles to Escoffier with Favonius Codex Etlali. This makes it harder to use more damage-oriented weapons on your supports, which the Kazuha Shilonen team can make room for. Fourth, even though Escoffier's turret maintains easy uptime on a red shred without refreshing the skill, its attacks are only single target, so it will only reapply the red shred on a single target. In addition, there will be a slight delay on the red shred applying in multi-wave scenarios, since you need to wait a little for Escoffier's turret to hit the enemy and apply the red shred. In AoE, or if a new wave of enemy spawns, if you want to apply or reapply Escoffier's red shred on all these enemies, you still need to rely on her using or reusing her skill or burst, while a character like Shilonen only requires you to be nearby an enemy while her red shred is active to apply, making Shilonen technically more effective in multi-wave scenarios than Escoffier. Lastly, if you have more investment into your Neuvillette, or if you're able to cheat out an extra A1 stack through an enemy elemental aura or Neuvillette C1, the Kazuha Shilonen team will outperform the Escoffier team. Now, Jeff states in his video that even with C1 Neuvillette, Escoffier is still looking like a minor upgrade.
Now, from what I've seen, I still think it's a minor upgrade to his teams even at C1, but it's a lot closer.
However, based on Prastal's calcs, this isn't true. Based on his results, a C1 Neuvillette, or one who is able to get an additional stack through an enemy aura, is looking to perform better in the Kazuha Shilonen team compared to the Escoffier team, both in terms of damage per second and damage per rotation. One reason for this is because of the difference in the amount of Neuvillette's A1 stacks that each team can provide against a neutral enemy. The Escoffier team can only trigger freeze at a baseline, so with C1 or an enemy elemental aura, the team is going from 1 A1 stack to 2. In contrast, the Kazuha Shilonen team triggers both Hydro Crystallize and Swirl, so with C1 or an enemy elemental aura, the team is going from 2 A1 stacks at a baseline to 3, and Neuvillette's damage increase from 2 to 3 A1 stacks is higher than 1 to 2 stacks. The other main reason is that when your main DPS does a lot of damage, you ideally want to buff that damage for the best team performance. Remember that Neuvillette with Escoffier will be doing less of a percentage of the team's total damage compared to the Kazuha Shilonen team, but if your Neuvillette is doing more personal damage through better vertical investment, you don't want to split his damage share within the team, which is the case in the Escoffier team. You want to make Neuvillette do most of the damage and funnel all the buffs to him, which is what the Kazuha Shilonen team does best. So the difference in team performance isn't just C1 Neuvillette. Any sort of increased character investment, whether it is better artifact quality, Neuvillette's signature, his constellations, or even Farina's signature or her constellations, will make the Kazuha Shilonen team perform better. Thus, while the Escoffier Neuvillette team does have a slightly higher DPS than the Kazuha Shilonen team on paper, because the Escoffier team performs worse in AoE, has a lower damage per rotation, has potential extra energy issues, and doesn't scale as well with higher investment in Neuvillette or Farina, the Neuvillette Escoffier Farina Etlali team is not his overall new best team, and the Kazuha Shilonen version will still be Neuvillette's general best team overall. This, however, doesn't mean that Escoffier is bad with Neuvillette. She's still a very solid side grade support option. In fact, she will be one of the most effective support choices for a Neuvillette team when against certain enemy matchups where cryo application is needed, such as the Electro Shield of an Abyss Lector, or against bosses like the new Secret Source Automaton Overseer device, whose main mechanic requires fast cryo hits. Escoffier is still a good support support for Neuvillette, especially in the right scenarios, just not the clear upgrade that many people may claim. So I wouldn't recommend pulling Escoffier just for your Neuvillette team, but if you pull Escoffier to buff a Cryo DPS primarily, then you will get value in being able to potentially use Escoffier with Neuvillette as another team option. To end the team section, here is the full team DPS calcs made by Harumi, which I slowly showcase when talking about each individual team. There are some teams which I didn't talk about which are shown here, such as Pyro, Escoffier, Plunge, so feel free to pause and take a look at the full calcs. To conclude this Escoffier guide, I wanted to share my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Not only does Escoffier deal solid off-field damage and have consistent cryo application, but she is also a strong healer and provides up to 55% res shred for Hydro and Cryo with her A4 passive, the largest single amount of res shred in the game. Just based on everything she provides to a team, Escoffier is quite a loaded support. She is the cryo version of units like Chiori and Emily, but with a modern kit design, as she doesn't just deal off-field damage, but also provides both buffs and utility. But her large amount of res shred can only be obtained if you play her in a team with only Hydro and Cryo characters, which is a significant team building restriction that is very similar with Chevreuse and her Overload teams. However, there are some key differences that make Escoffier's passive overall less restrictive. First, Chevreuse requires the team to only have Pyro and Electric characters in the party for her passive to work. Escoffier only counts the number of Hydro and Cryo teammates and will still give a small amount of res shred if other elemental party members are present. Second, while Chevreuse's res shred requires Overload to be triggered, Escoffier's res shred is only dependent on her attacks hitting an enemy, so triggering Freeze isn't technically required and the max res shred will still work if your entire team is Cryo characters. And third, Escoffier's off-field skill, damage, and Cryo application and her healing alone make her a decent Cryo support in non-freeze teams like Melt. Escoffier does have the flaw of being very single target oriented, meaning that in AoE her res shred may not consistently apply on all the enemies, but all of her strengths combined make Escoffier a solid support who is much more versatile than other supports who are considered niche. But even though I expect Escoffier to be a meta impactful character, I don't think she's going to be an extremely broken support on release. While she does work as a higher damage Rosaria outside her niche of freeze teams, Escoffier isn't looking to be the best support in most non-freeze teams like Melt, and other supports will be better options for these teams. Thus, Escoffier will generally stay within her niche of being a freeze support, and definitely for Cryo units in the freeze archetype specifically who have been struggling in the meta for a long time, Escoffier is exactly the buff that Cryo needs to be more meta relevant again, as she is a better support for these teams than Shilonen or Kazuha. Her personal damage and res shred to Hydra and Cryo is a very significant buff for freeze teams, bringing up their power level to be more similar to other team options for Cryo DPSs like Melt. Considering freeze has greatly fallen off as an archetype, it's great to have Escoffier buff them to make them more usable in the meta. On top of that, the Escoffier wheelchair team with Farinite and Yelan is a solid team core that can help carry weaker Cryo or Hydro DPSs. However, in most cases, Escoffier is just going to enable freeze-oriented teams to be a solid alternative to other team options, not their new best. For instance, Ganyu and Wriothesley Freeze are now more competitive, but not insanely better than their Melt teams. One of the only characters who is looking to get a significant damage buff on paper with Escoffier is Ayaka, as even for DPSs like Neuvillette, Escoffier is just a side grade. In the near future, however, I do think it is likely that Escoffier will be very meta impactful in terms of top DPS teams, mainly due to the upcoming release of Skirk. While her beta hasn't yet begun at the time of making this video, from the current information known about her kit, it is likely that Skirk has the same Hydro Cryo team building restrictions and will really want Escoffier as a support. Skirk will likely still be fine without Escoffier, but Escoffier will definitely be a huge damage increase for her teams if the actual kit is similar to the pre-beta one. And depending on the numbers, Skirk and Escoffier could make another top meta team in terms of DPS. Now of course, nothing about Skirk's kit is confirmed and it is very subject to change, but the point I want to make is that if future Cryo or Hydro characters are released that want to be played in freeze-oriented teams, Escoffier will gain much more value. So she could be a future-proof support that is the start of a new Cryo meta as we head into Not Cryo and Snezhnaya. However, there's also an equally likely chance that Hoyo just doesn't release new characters that want to be played in freeze. So I don't think calling Escoffier a must-pull future-proof support right now is correct. However, I think it's safe to say that for the freeze archetype specifically, Escoffier is and will remain a very strong support. And even outside of her niche, Escoffier can still be a decent off-field Cryo support, making her an overall pretty good support in the meta. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Escoffier. I couldn't have made this guide without the theory crafters behind the math shown in this video, so big shout out and big thanks to Harumi and Prastal for allowing me to showcase their calcs in this video. They both do some amazing TC work. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to y'all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Escoffier. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video or click the subscribe button for more Genshin guide and analysis videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Escoffier pulls.